Hello, and welcome to Laura Learn English. Today's story is emotional, mysterious, and full of unexpected discoveries. It will also help you improve your English listening and vocabulary through simple conversations and real-life emotions. As you listen, imagine every scene clearly. This is the story of a young teacher whose ordinary train journey changed her life forever after a stranger whispered 7 unforgettable words. Do not trust the man waiting for you. My name is Hannah. I am 29 years old, and I work as an English teacher in the quiet town of Maple Creek. My life was simple every weekday. I woke up at 6 o'clock, drank a cup of coffee, and walked to the small train station. I loved my students. They were curious, kind, and always asked interesting questions. One Friday afternoon, the school closed early because of heavy rain. I decided to take the afternoon train home instead of waiting for the evening one. The station was almost empty. Rain fell softly on the old wooden platform. When the train arrived, I stepped inside and looked at my ticket, seat 17. The carriage was quiet. Only a few passengers sat near the windows. When I reached my seat, I noticed an elderly woman sitting beside it. She wore a dark blue coat and held a small leather bag on her lap. Her silver hair was neatly tied back. She looked out of the window without saying a word. I smiled politely. "Good afternoon." She slowly turned toward me. For a moment, she stared into my eyes. Then she smiled. "You are Hannah," she said softly. I froze. "Yes, but how do you know my name?" She looked down at my ticket. "It is written there." I laughed quietly, of course. For the next 20 minutes, we traveled in silence. The sound of the rain filled the carriage. Just before the train reached my station, the woman gently touched my arm. Her voice became almost a whisper. "Do not trust the man waiting for you." Before I could ask what she meant, the train stopped. The woman stood, picked up her leather bag, and walked away into the rain. I never learned her name, but when I stepped onto the platform, someone was already waiting for me, and the moment I saw him, my heart began to race. I smiled when I recognized the man on the platform. 5 minutes later, I would begin to wonder why a complete stranger had warned me about him. The man standing on the platform was Daniel. Daniel had been my boyfriend for almost 3 years. He smiled as soon as he saw me. "There you are," he said, walking toward me with an umbrella. "I was afraid you would miss the train." I forced a smile. "I finished work early." He gently kissed my forehead. "You look tired. It has been a long day." As we walked toward the parking lot, the old woman's words echoed inside my mind. "Do not trust the man waiting for you." I almost laughed at myself. How could a complete stranger know anything about Daniel? He was kind, patient, and honest. At least, that was what I had always believed. Daniel opened the car door for me. The rain became heavier as we drove home. To make conversation, I asked, "How was your day?" He smiled. "Busy. I had meetings all afternoon." "What kind of meetings?" "Nothing interesting. Just work." His answer was short. Normally, Daniel loved talking about his job. Today, he quickly changed the subject. "What about your students?" I told him about a funny spelling mistake one of my students had made. He laughed. For a moment, Everything felt normal again. Maybe the old woman had simply frightened me for no reason. When we arrived home, Daniel went upstairs to change his clothes. "I forgot my phone in the car," he called from the bedroom. "Could you bring it for me?" Of course, I walked back outside. The rain had almost stopped. His phone was lying on the passenger seat. As I picked it up, the screen suddenly lit up. A new message appeared. She was on the train today. My heart skipped. Before I could understand the message, another one arrived. "Did she talk to you?" There was no name, only the letter M. I stared at the screen. Who was she? The old woman? No, that was impossible. Quickly, I locked the phone and carried it inside. Daniel smiled as I handed it to him. "Thanks, you are welcome." He looked at the screen for only a second. His smile disappeared. Then, almost immediately, he smiled again. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yes," he replied too quickly. "Just work, work." Again, that night, while Daniel slept peacefully beside me, I could not close my eyes. I kept thinking about two things: the old woman's warning and the mysterious message. Somehow, they felt connected. But I had no idea how. The next morning, I decided to return to the train station. I hoped to find the mysterious woman again. Instead, I found something far more shocking. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Daniel was still asleep. For a moment, I watched him quietly. He looked peaceful. It was hard to believe that a single text message could make me question someone I loved. I dressed quietly and left a short note on the kitchen table: "Gone for a walk. Back soon." Instead of going to the park, I drove straight to the train station. The morning air was cool. A few people hurried across the platform, carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Everything looked ordinary. I walked to the ticket office. A friendly man with gray hair smiled at me. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I know this may sound strange," I said, "but I am looking for an elderly woman. She traveled on yesterday's afternoon train. She had silver hair, a blue coat, and a small leather bag." The man frowned. "I am sorry, but I do not remember anyone like that. Could you check the passenger list?" He looked at his computer for a moment. "What seat was she in?" "Seat 17. Beside me." His fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. He looked at me with a confused expression. "Miss, according to our records, seat 17 was booked only once." I smiled politely. "Yes. By me." He slowly turned the computer screen toward me. There was no second passenger. A cold feeling spread through my chest. That cannot be right. I spoke with her for almost half an hour. The man shook his head gently. "I believe you saw someone. But according to our system, nobody purchased the seat beside you." I stepped away from the counter. Nothing made sense. As I turned toward the platform, I noticed an elderly cleaner sweeping near a bench. She had been listening quietly. When our eyes met, she walked toward me. "You are asking about the woman in the blue coat," she said softly. My heart raced. "You saw her?" The cleaner nodded slowly. "Many people have." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" The old woman looked down the empty railway tracks before speaking again. "She does not appear to everyone." A chill ran through my body. "Who is she?" The cleaner sighed. "No one knows her name." They simply call her the woman in seat 17. Before I could ask another question, a train arrived with a loud whistle. Passengers filled the platform. When I looked back, the cleaner was gone. She had disappeared into the crowd. I stood there in silence. Two strangers had spoken about the same mysterious woman, and somehow both of them seemed to know more about my life than I did. That evening, I returned home with more questions than answers. Then I noticed something inside Daniel's desk drawer, a faded photograph that changed everything. But inside, I could think of only one thing. Why did he have a photograph of the mysterious woman? And what promise had he made? That night, after Daniel fell asleep, I quietly took out my phone. I searched every combination of words I could think of. Woman in blue coat, seat 17, Maple Creek train mystery. Most of the results were ordinary. Then one old newspaper article caught my attention. The headline made my hands tremble. Local woman dies saving passengers in train. Accident 25 years ago. Below the headline was the same face I had seen on the train. I opened the article with shaking hands. What I discovered about the woman changed everything I believed about Daniel, and about the promise he had been hiding for years. That evening, I returned home feeling exhausted. The station had given me no answers. Instead, it had filled my mind with even more questions. Daniel was still at work. The apartment was silent. I made myself a cup of tea and tried to read a book, but I could not focus. The words on the page blurred together. My thoughts kept returning to the mysterious woman. Who was she, and how did she know about Daniel? An hour later, I remembered that I needed a pen to prepare tomorrow's lesson. Mine had run out of ink. Daniel always kept extra pens in his desk. Without thinking, I walked into his small home office. The room was neat, just as he always kept it. I opened the top drawer. There were pens, notebooks, and a few paper clips. As I reached for a blue pen, I noticed something stuck beneath an old notebook. It was a photograph. The edges were faded, as if it had been carried for many years. Curious, I picked it up. My heart almost stopped. The photograph showed a young Daniel. He looked much younger, perhaps 18 or 19. Standing beside him was the elderly woman from the train, the same silver hair, the same gentle smile, the same calm eyes. I stared at the picture in disbelief. "No," I whispered, "that is impossible." On the back of the photograph, someone had written a short message in blue ink: "Never forget your promise." There was no date, no signature, only those 4 words. A cold shiver ran through my body. I quickly returned the photograph to the drawer just as I heard the front door open. "Hannah," Daniel called, "I am home." I closed the drawer and walked into the living room. "There you are," he said with a smile. He walked over and kissed my forehead. "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" "I am just tired." He studied my face for a moment. "Are you sure?" "Yes." For the first time since we had met, I lied to him. During dinner, Daniel talked about work. I nodded and smiled. My hands trembled as I opened the newspaper article. The picture was old, but there was no doubt it was the same woman, the same gentle eyes, the same kind smile. The headline read, "Local woman dies saving passengers in train accident." I slowly began reading. 25 years earlier, A train had lost control during a terrible storm. Many passengers escaped. Others were trapped. According to the article, one passenger stayed behind to help strangers instead of saving herself. Her name was Evelyn Brooks. She helped several children leave the train before it caught fire. She never made it out. People called her a hero. I kept reading. Near the bottom of the article was one short sentence. She left behind a 6-year-old grandson. My heart skipped a beat. I whispered the words again. A grandson. Could that child be Daniel? The next morning, I could not stop thinking about the article. When Daniel came into the kitchen, he smiled as usual. Good morning, good morning. He poured himself a cup of coffee. Then he noticed the newspaper on the table. For the first time, his face lost all its color. You've been reading about the train accident. His voice was quiet. I looked into his eyes. Who was Evelyn Brooks? He froze. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Finally, he sat down. My grandmother. The room became silent. You never told me about her. I whispered. Daniel looked down at his coffee. It is not something I like talking about. I wanted to ask him about the photograph, about the promise, about the warning, but something told me to wait. Instead, I asked softly, did she really save those people? Daniel nodded. She saved many lives. His eyes became wet. I was 6 years old when she died. I barely remember her voice, but I remember one thing. What? She always told me. He stopped speaking. What did she tell you? Daniel looked toward the window. That someday, when I became a man, I must protect someone the way she protected strangers. A strange feeling settled inside me. His words sounded sincere. Very sincere. Then why had the woman on the train warned me not to trust him? That afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello, a calm female voice answered. Hannah. Yes, my name is Sarah. Brooks. My heart raced. Brooks, I am Evelyn's daughter. I stood up so quickly that my chair nearly fell over. There is something you need to know about Daniel. Before I could answer, she quietly added, my mother did not die by accident. The call suddenly ended. I stared at my phone in complete silence. Outside, dark clouds slowly covered the afternoon sky. For the first time, I wondered if the biggest secret was not Daniel's. Maybe it was his family's. That evening, I drove to the address Sarah had given me. Hidden inside an old wooden house was a box that had remained unopened for 25 years, and inside it was a letter with my name written on the front. For several minutes, I stared at my phone. My heart would not stop racing. The woman had said only a few words. My mother did not die by accident. Then the call ended. An hour later, another message arrived. It contained only an address, 14 Willow Lane. No explanation, no name, only one sentence. Please come alone. I almost ignored it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone was trying to frighten me. But deep inside, I knew I had to go. The old house stood at the end of a quiet street. Its white paint had faded with time. Colorful flowers still grew beside the front steps. Someone clearly loved this place. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. A woman in her early 50s opened it. She had kind eyes, the same gentle eyes I had seen in the newspaper photograph. You must be Hannah, she said softly. I am Sarah, I nodded. "Thank you for coming." She invited me inside. The house was warm and peaceful. Family photographs covered the walls. Many of them showed the smiling woman from the train, Evelyn Brooks. Sarah noticed me looking. "My mother loved photographs," she said. "She believed every picture protected a memory." We sat together in the living room. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, Sarah opened an old wooden box. The wood was scratched with age. Its small brass lock looked almost 50 years old. "My mother asked me to keep this safe." She gently placed the box on the table. "I promised never to open it until the right person arrived." I looked at her in surprise. "The right person?" Sarah nodded. "Yesterday, Daniel called me." My heart skipped. He told me someone had finally seen my mother. The room became silent. I swallowed slowly. "You believe me?" Sarah smiled sadly. "When I was a little girl, I saw her too." A cold chill ran through my body. "You saw her?" Sarah looked toward the window. "Only once, the night before my wedding." "What did she say?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "She told me not to be afraid, and she was right." For the first time since boarding that train, I no longer felt crazy. Maybe Evelyn really had appeared. Maybe she had been trying to protect someone. Sarah slowly opened the wooden box. Inside were old letters, a silver pocket watch, a train ticket, and one sealed envelope. Across the front, written in beautiful blue handwriting, were 4 simple words: "For Hannah Parker." My hands began to shake. "That is impossible." "I have never met your mother," Sarah whispered. "I do not think she wrote your name 25 years ago." "What do you mean?" "I think someone added it much later." Before I could answer, the front door suddenly opened. Footsteps echoed through the hallway. Sarah's face turned pale. "He is here," she whispered. "Who?" She looked directly into my eyes. "Daniel." Daniel slowly walked into the room. When he saw the old wooden box sitting open on the table, he whispered 5 words that made my blood run cold. "You were never supposed to see that." Daniel stood frozen in the doorway. His eyes were fixed on the old wooden box. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Finally, he took a slow step forward. "You were never supposed to see that," he said quietly. Sarah stood between us. "I promised Mother I would tell the truth when the time was right." Daniel closed his eyes. "The time was never supposed to come." I looked from Sarah to Daniel. "I am tired of secrets," I said. "Someone needs to explain what is happening." Daniel let out a long, tired sigh. Then he sat down. "You deserve the truth." He looked at the wooden box before speaking again. "When I was 6 years old, my grandmother saved people on that train. I always believed she died because of the accident." He paused, "But when I turned 18, Sarah showed me these letters." Sarah gently opened one of the old envelopes. Inside was a handwritten letter. The paper had turned yellow with age. She began reading aloud. "If you are reading this, it means the truth can no longer stay hidden." My heart beat faster. Sarah continued. "The train did not crash because of bad weather. Someone ignored the safety warnings. Many innocent people paid the price." Daniel lowered his head. "My grandmother discovered the truth before she died, but powerful people buried the investigation." I looked at him in disbelief. "So, she was trying to expose what really happened?" Daniel nodded. Yes. Sarah opened another envelope. Inside was a list of names. Some had small check marks beside them. One name had a red circle around it. Michael Parker. I stared at the page. My last name is Parker. Sarah looked at me gently. Michael Parker was your grandfather. I felt the room spinning. My grandfather, he worked for the railway company. I could barely breathe. Was he responsible? Sarah quickly shook her head. No, he tried to stop the train from leaving. He warned everyone that the brakes had not been repaired, but nobody listened. He spent the rest of his life believing he had failed. Tears filled my eyes. My grandfather never talked about his job. Daniel spoke softly. He blamed himself, but according to my grandmother's letters, he was one of the heroes. I looked at Daniel. If you knew all this, why didn't you tell me? Pain filled his face. Because I was afraid. Afraid you would think our families were connected only because of tragedy. And, he hesitated. My grandmother left me one final promise. What promise? He looked directly into my eyes. She told me that if I ever met someone from the Parker family, I must protect them. The room became silent. Suddenly, everything began to make sense. The warning on the train, the mysterious messages, the old photograph. Daniel had never been hiding an affair. He had been hiding a promise made 25 years ago. But one question still remained. If Evelyn wanted to protect me, who was I in danger from? Just then, Sarah reached into the bottom of the wooden box. She pulled out one final envelope. Unlike the others, it looked new. Across the front, someone had written only 3 words, "Open tomorrow morning." Daniel's face turned pale. I have never seen that envelope before, neither had Sarah. I carefully picked it up. It felt heavier than a letter should. Something else was inside. The next morning, I opened the envelope. What fell onto the table was not another letter. It was a small brass key with the number 17 engraved on it. The next morning, I could hardly sleep. The envelope rested on the kitchen table. Daniel and Sarah stood beside me in complete silence. With shaking hands, I opened it. A small brass key slipped onto the table. It landed with a soft click. Engraved on it were 2 numbers, 17. There was also a folded note. I slowly unfolded it. It read, Central Station. Locker 17. The truth has been waiting there for 25 years. No signature, no explanation. Daniel stared at the note. I have never seen this before. Sarah shook her head. My mother never mentioned any locker. Within an hour, the 3 of us were standing inside Central Station. Hundreds of travelers hurried past us. Some carried suitcases. Others rushed to catch their trains. No one noticed the 3 people standing silently near the old luggage lockers. Finally, we found it. Locker 17. Its paint was faded. Dust covered the small metal door. It looked as if nobody had touched it in years. My heart pounded as I placed the brass key into the lock. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, click, the lock opened. Inside was a single leather briefcase. Daniel carefully lifted it out. It felt surprisingly heavy. We carried it to a quiet waiting room before opening it. Inside were dozens of documents, old photographs, train maintenance reports, handwritten letters. and one small cassette recorder. Sarah picked up one of the letters. Her hands began to shake. "It is my mother's handwriting." She slowly read the first page. "If you are listening to this, someone finally found the truth." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. Daniel quietly pressed the play button on the cassette recorder. For a moment, only static filled the room. Then a gentle female voice spoke. "My name is Evelyn Brooks." My heart stopped. It was the woman from the train. The room became completely silent. "If this recording still exists," the voice continued, "it means innocent people are still carrying the blame. I saw the inspection report before the train left. The brakes were never repaired. I begged the station manager to stop the train. He refused. I promised myself that if I survived, I would tell the truth." The recording paused. A deep breath could be heard. Then Evelyn whispered, "I did not survive." Sarah covered her mouth and began to cry. Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time in nearly 25 years, he heard his grandmother's voice again. The recording continued. "To my grandson Daniel, if you are hearing this, do not spend your life chasing revenge. Choose truth, choose kindness. And if one day you meet someone from the Parker family, tell them their grandfather died trying to save us." Tears rolled down my face. For years, two families had carried guilt that never belonged to them. One had lost a grandmother. The other had lost a grandfather's good name. Both had suffered because of one hidden lie. Just as Daniel reached for another folder, the waiting room door suddenly opened. A tall man in a dark suit stepped inside. Behind him stood two police officers. The man looked directly at the briefcase. Then he quietly said, "I have been looking for those documents for 25 years." The room fell silent. Daniel slowly stood in front of the briefcase. "Who are you?" he asked. The man's face remained calm. "My name is Richard Hale. My father was the station manager on the day of the accident." He took one slow step forward. "And those papers were never supposed to be found, Richard. Hale offered us a deal. If we walked away that day, our lives would stay peaceful. If we refused, the truth would finally be revealed, but it would destroy far more lives than our own." The waiting room became silent. Richard Hale looked calmly at the old briefcase. Then he spoke. "My father made one terrible decision. He ignored the safety warning. He spent the rest of his life trying to hide the truth." Daniel stepped in front of the briefcase. "So you knew these documents existed?" Richard nodded. "Yes, I searched for them for years." Sarah looked at him with tears in her eyes. "My mother died because of your father's decision." Richard lowered his head. "I know. And I am deeply sorry." For a long moment, nobody moved. Finally, Richard reached into his coat pocket. He slowly placed a small envelope on the table. "My father wrote this before he died. He asked me to give it to your family if the truth was ever discovered." Sarah carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten confession. She read it aloud. "My name is Thomas Hale. I was the station manager on the day of the accident. I ignored the inspection report because I feared losing my job. That decision cost innocent lives. Evelyn Brooks warned me. Michael Parker warned me. I ignored them both. The blame belongs to me alone." when Sarah finished reading. Tears filled every eye in the room. Daniel quietly closed the briefcase. For 25 years, two innocent families had carried pain that never belonged to them. Now, the truth finally had a voice. Several weeks later, the story appeared in newspapers across the country. The railway company officially reopened the investigation. Evelyn Brooks was honored for her courage. Michael Parker's name was cleared. A memorial was built beside the old railway station. On a warm spring morning, Daniel and I stood together in front of it. Fresh flowers covered the stone. Children played nearby. Trains quietly passed in the distance. Sarah gently placed one white rose beneath Evelyn's name. I placed another beneath Michael's. Neither of them had been forgotten. Daniel looked at the sky and smiled. I think Grandma can finally rest. I smiled back. I think so too. As we turned to leave, I noticed an elderly woman sitting alone on a bench across the platform. She wore a familiar blue coat. She smiled warmly at me. I smiled back, for just 1 second. I looked away as a train passed. When I looked again, the bench was empty. Only one small white flower remained where she had been sitting. I walked over and gently picked it up. Tied around the flower was a tiny piece of paper. It read, "Some promises do not end with goodbye." I folded the note carefully and placed it inside my pocket. As Daniel and I walked away together, I realized something. The mysterious woman had never come to fill my life with fear. She had come to lead us toward the truth. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is not protecting a secret. It is finding the courage to reveal it. Ending. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this journey, we hope you will join us again for another English story. Until next time, keep learning, keep listening, and remember, the truth may take years to arrive, but it always finds the right station.